leather print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is P. Fitz, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 25th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trump derails housing bill, fueling strains. GOP meeting turns fiery over Iran war as president again presses voting bill. Washington, President Trump abruptly canceled plans to sign bipartisan housing legislation, while again pushing a bill that would impose strict new voter eligibility rules. A big reversal hours before he engaged in a fiery clash with one of his top Republican critics over the Iran war. Trump's blindsiding of lawmakers and his contentious lunch meeting with Republican senators heightened tensions within the Republican Party as November elections edge closer. Frustrations have been mounting for months with the White House, while the White House ignored Congress on the Iran war, and Trump targeted some veteran lawmakers for defeat for being insufficiently loyal to him. More recently, Trump derailed plans to extend a key surveillance power and install a new intelligence chief. The lunch meeting with GOP senators was called to focus on Save America Act, which Trump sees as critical to helping Republicans win midterm elections. But the bill is opposed by some Republicans and all Democrats, and doesn't have enough support to pass inside the room. Inside the room, Trump quickly turned the conversation to Iran. The president and Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana shouted at each other about the war and the senator's recent vote to rein in the president's powers. Trump, a Republican who engineered Cassidy's defeat in his primary last month, called the outgoing senator a loser and told him to sit down, according to people familiar with the exchange. Cassidy replied that no one tells him to sit down. The president also ripped into Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and chided Rand Paul of Kentucky. People familiar with the matter said the two GOP senators voted with Cassidy's. Senator Susan Collins of Maine and most Democrats to pass non-binding resolution on Tuesday that would direct Trump to move U.S. troops from hostilities against Iran. The House had passed the measure earlier in the month. Speaking after the lunch, Cassidy said he had lost his temper. He said that Trump had brought up the Iran War Powers Resolution, asking why anyone would have voted for it. So Cassidy stood up and said, "You have not told the American people what's going on," he said. It was supposed to last 4 weeks. It lasted 4 months. Trump raised his voice, and Cassidy said he matched his tone and his volume. At one point, Trump mocked him for losing his primary election. Cassidy said, which of course, I lost the election. Way to observe that, Cassidy scoffed. I made it clear that I wasn't going to be bullied, and I made it clear that I think we need answers. And what was that? Trump signed last week a memorandum of understanding with Iranian leaders to reopen the Strait of Hormuz and to begin talks aimed at ending Tehran's nuclear program. Despite Trump's goal of destroying Iran's stock of ballistic missiles, he said last week that it was fair for the regime to maintain some of the weapons. In comments to reporters, Trump said it was a really great meeting and didn't address the intra-party debate over Iran. He asked Senate Majority Leader John Thune of South Dakota, whom Trump has pressed for months to find the votes to pass the Save America Act. That's a voting rights bill, which requires proof of citizenship to register to vote and tightens other voting rules nationwide. We like everybody really in the room, Trump said. I don't like a few people, but that's okay. Republicans have a 53-47 majority in the Senate, but the Save America Act requires 60 votes to advance. Due to the chamber's long-standing filibuster rule, no Democrats support the proposal. That has prompted Trump to press Republicans to eliminate the filibuster rule. Bethune has rejected the idea. The president was there to sell Save America. Break the filibuster if you want to, if we need to, said Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. He wants that passed so bad. Senators had been bracing for a tense meeting in a series of social media messages early Wednesday. Trump canceled plans to sign the bipartisan housing legislation that the House and Senate passed this week. He said he would refuse to take action on the measure until Congress passes the Save America Act. Trump has previously warned that Republicans will lose the midterms unless they pass the bill into law. But many GOP senators have repeatedly told him it has no path to passage, and have instead pushed the White House to extricate the country from the Iran war and show more focus on the economy ahead of the midterms. Democrats have a strong shot at taking back the House in the midterms. In the Senate, Republicans are increasingly nervous that their majority also could be at risk. I mean, my goodness, I thought that we were happy about addressing affordability, said Tom Tillis from North Carolina, who has clashed with the White House and is retiring after this term. I don't know why you're holding a bill that's ready for signature hostage over a bill that will never pass in this Congress. In the closed-door meeting, Trump dismissed the housing bill. At my rallies, no one cares about the housing bill. They're falling asleep, Trump told senators, according to a person briefed on his remarks. But when I say Save America, I can get them to sit down, the person said. A second person confirmed the remarks. Under the Constitution, a bill passed by Congress becomes law in about 2 weeks if the president doesn't sign or veto the measure. The GOP-controlled Congress also could delay sending the bill to the White House indefinitely. The Senate passed the housing bill with 85-5 majority. Senators Mike Lee of Utah and Rick Scott of Florida and Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, who have advocated for using more floor time to try and pass the Save America Act, were among the handful of lawmakers to vote no. Scott had invited Trump to the lunch meeting Wednesday. The housing bill is a package of more than 50 provisions aimed at making it easier to build homes and make housing more affordable. It includes measures speeding up federal environmental reviews for certain housing projects, removing restrictions on building manufactured homes, and tying cities' federal funding to their housing production. Trump's social media post canceling the signing on Wednesday came as House Speaker Mike Johnson of Louisiana was holding a news conference touting the bill. Johnson called it a great policy, and said he expected Trump ultimately he would sign it. China is building up the yuan, hobbling Western sanctions. Iran and Russia have used the currency to carry out oil sales and other trade evading controls on dollar transactions. The White House has entered talks with Iran over a new nuclear deal relying on traditional strength, the promise of sanctions relief, and access to some of roughly $100 billion in frozen assets. Yet the leverage is waning. Tehran has blunted the U.S. sanctions campaign in recent years by successfully using China's financial architecture, built on the yuan, that operates beyond Washington's reach. The shift was evident in late April when the U.S. escalated its economic fury campaign against Iran, sanctioning a major Chinese refinery. It said bought billions of dollars worth of Iranian oil. The refiner, Hengli Petrochemical, said its supplier had guaranteed oil wasn't Iranian. But it also put the U.S. on notice. Future oil purchases, Hengli said, would be settled on instead of U.S. dollars, the energy market's main currency, making it harder for outsiders to track the flows. It was the latest sign of troubling new development for Washington. More of the world's illicit activity to evade sanctions is being handled in yuan as China builds an alternative financial system aimed at weakening Washington's power to dictate world affairs. The dominance of the U.S. dollar, currently used in roughly 80% of the international trade finance, has historically given Washington a big advantage in policing global business. Most international transactions denominated in U.S. dollars, banks, giving Washington the ability to monitor them and cut off users' dollars if necessary, crippling their operations. But when the U.S. adversaries use the yuan to run their businesses, the transactions don't enter the U.S.-led banking system, neutering Washington's powers. The U.S. has cleared the way for Iran to resume its oil sales and even be paid in dollars during the negotiation period. But even under U.S. sanctions meant to block the sales, Iran earned up to $43 billion in oil revenue in 2024, before accounting for unspecified discounts according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. The discounts vary, but in 2025 averaged about 13%, according to U.S. lawmakers. Most of the sales were paid for in yuan, according to the U.S. Treasury. Tehran uses the money to buy Chinese car parts, solar panels, and other goods and services, as well as the dual-use inputs materials purportedly for civilian use that could also be used for weapons, all beyond the U.S. jurisdiction. Boats seeking safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz during the conflict were told to pay Tehran in yuan, or cryptocurrencies, which are also hard for Washington to control. Iranian and Chinese partners have set up secretive intermediaries and front companies in Hong Kong and elsewhere to help uh, facilitate more trade in yuan, Treasury officials said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. If you would like to hear the remainder of the Chinese yuan finance article, call the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 716-821-5555. AI boom sparks new wave of inflation. President Trump's trade wars have waned. The price of gas is finally falling, but inflation has a new catalyst. U.S.'s artificial intelligence build-out is beginning to push up prices on everything from smartphones to electricity. The question now is how widely that build-out might ripple through the economy and how long it could keep inflation elevated. The answers will have big consequences for the economy. The money pouring into AI arms race is unprecedented. Analysts peg capital spending at 5 of the so-called hyperscalers alphabet. Amazon, Meta, platforms Microsoft, and Oracle at $741 billion this year, according to FactSet, up nearly 75% from last year. Where is all that money going? While much of the conversation is focused on what AI can do, the build-out itself is strikingly physical, said Columbia University economist Stijn van Nieuwerburg. The data centers used for AI require sophisticated computing equipment, cooling systems to keep that equipment from overheating, electric backup generators to prevent power disruptions. Based on announced and planned developments, Van Nieuwerburg estimated that spending on AI build-out through 2032 could come to about $8 trillion, nearly 5 times the market value of the entire New York City property markets. With so much demand, prices are rising for many of the things that go into AI build-out. And because those things are used for more than just AI, those prices increases are spilling over into the broader economy. Memory and storage chips, for example, are used in an array of consumer electronics products. That includes everything from video game consoles to cars. Nintendo, Microsoft, and Sony have all raised prices on devices. Higher price tags are coming to Apple products too, according to Chief Executive Tim Cook, who told the Wall Street Journal that the jump in cost was unlike anything he had ever seen in any area in over 40 years. If AI is as revolutionary as many economists predict, it could eventually cool inflation. That is the lesson from past technological revolutions, which boosted workers' productivity, making it easier for businesses to meet demand without raising prices. Kevin Warsh, now the Federal Reserve Chairman, has previously made that case. AI will be a significant disinflationary force, increasing productivity and bolstering American competitiveness, he wrote in the Journal in November. Warsh's read on the AI boom is impact on inflation will be a first major test of his Fed leadership. AI infrastructure could be built out far faster than past transformational technologies like railroads in the 19th century, electrification in the early 20th century, or telecommunications during the dot-com boom. But it will take time to bear fruit. Even under an accelerated timeline, economists at UBS reckon it will take at least a couple of years before AI would start helping to lower inflation. In the short term, demand powered by AI is leading to higher prices. In National Association for Business Economics survey of economists released on Monday, 81% of respondents said the AI build-out will add to inflation over the next year. In the first phase of any major technological revolution, you tend to have a strain on limited resources, and that tends to put upward pressure on prices, said Parthenon chief, EY Parthenon chief, economist Gregory Dako, who is the president of NABE. Already, this is beginning to show up in the inflation data. Consumer prices and computer software and accessories were up about 15% earlier in May, according to the Labor Department. There could be more price increases in the pipeline. The Labor Department's measure of wholesale electronic components and accessories was up to 27% from a year earlier last month. The effect of AI build-out on prices could be fundamentally different from either the tariffs that were put in place last year or this year's jump in the fuel prices, according to strategists at Everscore ISI. Tariffs and oil are one-time shocks temporarily making their way into price increases. AI is a shock to demand that could persist for years. If you would like to hear the remainder of this article, please call Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service at 716-821-5555. In news briefs from Boston, judge bars Trump order on elections. A federal judge Wednesday permanently barred President Trump's administration from implementing most of his first executive order on elections, part of which sought to require people to show documentary proof of citizenship when they register to vote. The ruling by U.S. District Judge Denise Casper in Boston effectively converts a preliminary injunction she issued a year ago into a permanent ban. Casper rejected the administration's argument that the lawsuit to block the changes brought by Democratic state attorneys general was premature because the rules had yet to be implemented. The Constitution does not grant the president any specific powers over elections, she wrote. In Northern California, earthquakes shake a rural region. A rural area of Northern California experienced its strongest earthquake since 1940 Wednesday morning, but it caused only mild shaking with no immediate reports of damage or injuries. The epicenter of the quake, with a preliminary magnitude of 5.6, was about 7 miles northwest of the agricultural town of Willits, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. The initial quake was centered inland about 50 miles east of Fort Bragg at 8:10 a.m. local time, and the USG said that it was about 5 miles deep. This was the biggest earthquake in nearly 9 decades in the region, which is not on a major fault line. said Lucy Jones, a veteran California seismologist. 3 other quakes under 2.7 magnitude struck near the epicenter within an hour. In Colorado, ex-forensic analyst in plea agreement. A former forensic analyst with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to 4 felony counts of stemming from accusations that she manipulated and omitted data to speed up the DNA testing process, calling into question the validity of hundreds of criminal cases. Yvonne Missy Woods entered the guilty pleas to committing a cyber crime, perjury, attempting to influence a public servant, and forgery. Dozens of other counts were dismissed as part of a plea agreement. Authorities accused Woods, who resigned in 2023 after a decades-long career of altering data, concealed, tampering, deleting data that showed she failed to troubleshoot issues within the testing process and not thoroughly documenting tests performed in case records. Texas camp files for bankruptcy protection. Camp Mystic, an all-girls camp in Texas Hill Country, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection Wednesday, nearly a year after 28 people died there in catastrophic flash flooding. The camp said in its filing that it's had debts of $10 million to $50 million and that its assets were under $10 million. The Christian camp in Hunt, Texas has faced regulatory scrutiny and wrongful death lawsuits from families of the victims since the flood on July 4th, 2025. Camp Mystic is set along the Guadalupe River, which swelled after heavy rain sweeping away cabins and killing 25 girls, 2 teenage counselors, and the camp's longtime director, Dick Eastland. Camp Mystic didn't respond to a request to comment Wednesday. A lawyer representing the families of the victims also didn't respond to a request for comment. The bankruptcy filed in U.S. Bankruptcy Court in the Southern District of Texas comes weeks after the camp canceled plans to partially reopen for the summer following opposition from state lawmakers and parents of the victims. Camp Mystic withdrew its license application in April after authorities said its emergency plans fell short in more than 20 categories. Some 850 campers were expected to attend the camp for its 100th season. Investigators said the camp wasn't prepared for disaster and didn't have a written evacuation plan, and some senior leaders ignore life-threatening weather warnings. At least 135 people died in the floods that day across central Texas. White House and lawmaker face off over Turkish arms sale. The Trump administration is in a standoff with the Democratic lawmaker who is blocking a proposed $750 million sale of jet engines to Turkey over concerns about countries' ties to Russia. Representative Gregory Meeks of New York is holding up the sale of Turkey, an important NATO ally that is hosting a summit meeting of the alliance next month. Because the country continues to hold a Russian S-400 air defense system that it bought roughly a decade ago, along with other concerns about Turkey's role in the region. It is a long-standing practice for executive branch to secure the approval of key lawmakers to go ahead with sales, though the administration could press ahead despite the hold, a person familiar with the matter said. The face-off at the sensitive time illustrates how Turkey's purchase of air defense system continues to cloud its relations with the U.S. despite its important bases and a role as a mediator in talks to end the war with Iran and Ukraine. Critics worry that Russian system could gather key information on U.S. technology if used side by side, an issue that has also stymied Turkey's attempts to buy advanced American F-35 fighters. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Asked about the proposed sale, administration officials said President Trump has a great relationship with President Erdogan of Turkey, who has been a great partner in the region. The disagreement comes as Trump is expected to visit the Turkish capital, Ankara, in July for a summit of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It shows the limits of a recent thaw in the Turkish-American ties resulting from a warm personal relationship between Trump and Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has lobbied the U.S. to lift limits on arms sales to Turkey. A spokesman for the Turkish foreign minister didn't reply to a request to comment. In the arms sale at issue, the administration asked congressional leaders to approve the sale of the U.S.-made F-110 jet engine for future use in the Ka-an fighter being developed by Turkey. U.S. officials familiar with the proposed sale said. Proponents of the sale said the holdup in Congress shows how negative views of Erdogan among lawmakers are complicating other aspects of the security relationship with important NATO ally. We don't ever talk about the F-110 sales to, like, Denmark. It's not controversial, said Aaron Stein, president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute, an American think tank. Under a long-standing government procedure, the chair and the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee must sign off before the executive branch can proceed with a major foreign arms sale. This initial review usually takes place in secret before the State Department publicly notifies Congress of the intended sale. The sale of the jet engines is so-called direct commercial sale in which U.S. companies can sell military equipment overseas with government permission, according to people familiar with the deal. Two Democratic congressional aides said Meeks also decided to pause the sale over concerns about Turkey's role in Syria and the tensions with Greece, including its decision this year to send warplanes to Cyprus. Mamdani's influence on Democrats deepens. Mayor's candidates tack more to the left to win primaries, testing party leaders. Zoran Mamdani, an upstart Democratic socialist with a knack for social media and a focus on affordability, stunned the Democratic establishment last year with his victory in New York City mayoral primary. Tuesday's primary results make clear that the now mayor's rise wasn't a fluke, and his growing political power will be a continuing challenge for Democratic leadership. Mamdani already has inspired the slate of like-minded progressives who are working from similar playbook as they challenge incumbent Democrats around the country. His winning bets in 3 congressional races in New York City could embolden him to make endorsements in races farther from home. The trio of candidates he endorsed were unabashed in their criticism of what they have regarded as an out-of-touch, over-cautious Democratic establishment. All three won their primaries, knocking out two incumbents and a contender who had the blessings of the Democratic Party leaders. Mayor Mamdani didn't just pick winners, he made winners, said Amit Singh Baga, a New York Democratic strategist. Some Democrats are worried Mamdani's rise creates fresh opening for Republicans to point them at as a far-left party, disconnected from the views of mainstream voters. But party leaders have been unwilling to confront him publicly as they recognize his growing influence in political charisma. New York Attorney General Letitia James on CNN criticized his endorsement, saying, "All of us are a little frustrated with the Democratic Party, but you don't blow it up. That's what MAGA has done." Mamdani didn't say Wednesday whether he would endorse in other races outside of New York, but said he thought that the New York races had hit on themes that resonate nationwide. Part of my hope in working to elect these Congress people, these state legislators, is also to help write a new chapter in our party's history where working people are back at the heart of that struggle. He said, "I believe that will be key in not just the midterms coming up in November, but also in years to come." Two of the Mamdani endorsed candidates, Claire Valdez and Daria Liza Avia Chevalier, are Democratic socialists who share the mayor's views on issues such as Israel and immigration. A third Mamdani-backed candidate, former city controller Brad Lander, unseated two-term incumbent Representative Dan Goldman by running farther to the left on Israel and linking Goldman with the powerful pro-Israel lobbying group that the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. Valdez, a former labor organizer and first-term state assemblyman member, defeated another progressive Brooklyn Borough President, Antonio Reynoso, who had the backing of retiring Rep. Nadia Velasquez Avia Chevalier. A first-time candidate and organizer edged out five-term incumbent Representative Adriano Espaillat. Success of Mamdani's favored candidates could help provide momentum to other left-wing candidates around the country. Democratic Socialist Malat Kiros, who modeled her congressional campaign in Mamdani's, is set to square off next week against incumbent Representative Diana DeGetti in a Denver primary. And Los Angeles City Council member Nithya Raman, also a Democratic Socialist, is competing against Mayor Karen Bass, a center-left Democrat, in a runoff election in November. Democrat Socialists also have scored wins in mayoral races in Washington, D.C. and Seattle in the past year. Gustavo Gordillo, co-chair of the New York City chapter of Democratic Socialists of America, said the Democratic establishment has failed to provide clear vision or agenda for voters, leaving room for the emergence of candidates who share Mamdani's progressive brand of politics. It's been Democratic Socialists who have filled that power vacuum ever since the mayoral campaign. Republicans are using the wins to depict Democratic Party as extreme. Mike Marinella, a spokesman for the National Republican Congressional Committee, said Tuesday night was the night the Democratic establishment officially surrendered to Zohran Mamdani and the socialist wing of their party. Big banks ace easier stress test. The results were expected after the Fed last year began disclosing scenarios. J.P. Morgan Chase of America and a collection of their peers all passed the Federal Reserve's annual stress test, a widely expected outcome after regulators last year began disclosing the exam scenarios and models in advance. The Fed on Wednesday said the big banks were equipped to weather severe economic headwinds. After putting banks through a hypothetical situation where a severe global recession leads to significant declines in commercial real estate and house prices and rising unemployment, bank capital fell only slightly, staying well above the minimum level at which the Fed considers banks to be safe. As a group, the banks would have faced $708 billion in total loan losses, the smallest total of any test in the last 7 years. Overall, capital declined in aggregate only 1.6%, the smallest reduction in any test in the last 7 years. The results won't come as a surprise. Acting under legal pressure, the Fed in late 2024 said it would begin releasing models they use to calculate how well banks fare in any given hypothetical. Critics of the move have accused the Fed of giving away the answers to its own test before it happens. The scenario this year was also similar to last year's, and the Fed announced in advance that it wouldn't affect bank capital buffers given plans to change the exam. Normally, individual results from the test are used to determine how much more capital a bank must hold, known as the stress capital buffer. To defend against economic downturns, banks are required to hold a certain amount of capital in reserve instead of lending it out to generate profits. The annual stress test looks at what would happen to banks under adverse conditions. This year, 32 banks were put to the test, including a number of large regional banks that aren't subject to the test every year. The Trump administration, to boost the economy, launched a series of deregulatory changes benefiting financial firms, including altering other rules around the capital that banks must hold. Officials argue the changes will get the banks back into areas of business that they had retreated from, including corporate loans and home mortgages. For several quarters, the largest banks have trumpeted big profits and said they plan to put money to work in new loans, but also more stock buyback and acquisitions. J.P. Morgan Chief Executive Jamie Dimon last month said that the bank was considering acquisitions worth as much as $20 billion in the next few years. Now that has greater flexibility. International news in brief. Qualcomm, AI software firm acquired for $3.9 billion. Qualcomm agreed to acquire the artificial intelligence software company Modular for about $3.9 billion in a bid to make artificial intelligence faster and cheaper for its customers. The semiconductor company said that as consideration for the acquisition, Qualcomm expected to issue as many as 19.2 million shares of its common stock to equity owners of Modular. That values the deal at about $30.92 billion, based on Qualcomm's closing price of $204.13 a share on Tuesday. The issuance and sale of the shares will be made in a private placement, Qualcomm said. Modular provides software that allows AI to run efficiently across hardware architectures, enabling developers to deploy AI at the lower total cost. Qualcomm said it aimed to help customers move AI production from device to cloud more quickly. Qualcomm shares declined 3.3% Wednesday to 197.41. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Trucking costs drive business back to trains. American retailers and manufacturers are learning to love trains again. Companies abandoned the rails in recent years because trucking was faster, more secure way of moving furniture, food, and electronics across the country. Now trucking rates are climbing toward their highest levels in 4 years. Some businesses are deciding a slower, cheaper route across the country suits them fine. Everybody's exploring intermodal, said Milton Magos, a vice president of Mexico operations at freight brokerage Trafix. They want to know how they can make their supply chain more reliable. North American international transports, in which railroads carry containers and truck trailers, rose about 6% in May from a year earlier to an average of around 369,000 containers and trailers a week, according to the Association of American Railroads. That was the largest annual increase since March of 2025, when companies were rushing in merchandise ahead of expected new tariffs. International transport, which uses trucking for the final leg of delivery, is slower and more complicated than long-haul trucking. Trains stalled at rail yards and containers sitting at terminals can be targeted by thieves, but intermodal is also cheaper and more fuel efficient, which has made the transportation mode particularly attractive as fuel prices have soared. Trucking rates are climbing after 4 years in which carriers were squeezed by a combination of too many trucks on the road and not enough loads. An exodus of carriers has accelerated over the past year due to low earnings combined with Trump administration crackdown on foreign drivers. The rising cost to transport goods via truck has forced more and more folks to think about whether intermodal is a viable alternative as those savings start to look more like 10, 15, 20% potential, said Mark Yeager, chief executive of Redwood Logistics. The average spot rate for U.S. intermodal was 1.16 a mile for the week ended June 16th, according to intermodal service provider Intech Logistics. Though most intermodal loads move under long-term contract rates rather than on the spot market, the intermodal spot rate was well below the $3.05 a mile average spot rate for the most common type of big rigs for the week ended June 13, according to DAT Freight Analytics. Magos of Traffic said intermodal shipping is especially in demand for crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, as some drivers avoid the route for fear of getting swept up in U.S. immigration enforcement. Logistics executives say investments by railroads and in intermodal providers is making transportation method more reliable, have helped shippers make the switch. J.B. Hunt Transport Services, one of the country's largest intermodal providers, reported its highest yet first quarter domestic intermodal volume. Startup founders' new aspiration among computer science graduates. Das Prabhume weighed his job options after graduating in May from the University of California, Berkeley, with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering and a computer science. Returned to a startup where he interned, tried to get a job at a large AI company, or launch a new business. Prabhume went bold with option number 3. A small irrationality is needed to take an oversized bet on yourself, he said. Launching a startup has become the preferred path for more computer science graduates like Prabhume. Research shows plenty of capital and venture interest, as well as automated coding advancements, have spurred many grads to go the founder route. At the same time, declining opportunities of landing a job as employers favor more experienced hires in fields like software engineering have led many to seek ways to be their own boss. The share of 2025 computer science graduates who were employed identifying as founders doubled to 6% compared to 2.9% in 2022 class across U.S. universities, according to a new report by venture firm Signalfire. The report analyzed LinkedIn profiles for more than 10,000 bachelor's recipients in each year. Stanford University, a longtime hub of entrepreneurship, had the highest percentage of all 2025 computer science graduates as founders in the Signalfire study at almost 17%. Next on the list were California Institute of Technology and Harvard University, with each slightly more than 8% of its 2025 computer science class becoming founders. Venture firms are scouting campuses for young entrepreneurs with a growing list of active accelerators and fellowship programs. Close to a fifth of the 2025 computer science graduate founders in the Signalfire sample had raised venture capital already. Signalfire's head of research, Asher Bantak, said the rise in entrepreneurship by fresh grads is likely tied to some degree of the difficult hiring market. About 13% of the 2025 computer science class were working as software engineers at the dozen largest technology companies, down from the most almost a quarter of the 2022 graduates per Signalfire. Hiring of people with 1 year or less experience has plummeted across big tech and startups in what Signalfire calls junior lockout. Under 3% of the hires made by early-stage venture-backed startups in 2025 were entry-level, down from 15% a decade prior per the data. While many venture investors see the rise of young entrepreneurs as positive, some worry about the motivations of some founders during the AI gold rush. We've been backing more dropouts and recent grads than ever this year, said Jeremy Finance founder and managing partner of House Fund, a venture firm that backs startups launched by Berkeley students, alumni, and faculty. I've also felt that more than ever, what I see happening is students will start the startups, and they don't even necessarily know why they are doing it, he said. Brad Hoon, the Berkeley graduate, said, pardon the interruption. Brad Hoon, the Berkeley graduate, said that he had alternatives but decided to co-found a machine learning startup because the timing for the idea was right and capital available. While being a founder is risky, Brad Hoon said it also rewarding. You get agency, you get speed, you get to work closely with the people you like. I believe I've made a difficult, somewhat irrational decision, and regardless of the difficulty, we'll keep our heads down and focus on building our company. Cerebra's results spook investors, but outlook remains strong. In a market jittery about anything AI related, it's a little wonder that Cerebra's projection of a narrow profit margins in its financial results Tuesday caused a scare. The company's shares fell nearly 20% of their IPO price on Wednesday. Yet there are bigger questions hanging over the chip company, which had its IPO last month. One is whether it can diversify its customer base. Another is whether it can capitalize on the fact that the way its AI processors are produced means it doesn't need memory chips that are in short supply. And on those fronts, things are looking a bit brighter. Cerebras said it in listing documents that about 86% of its revenue last year came from customers in the United Arab Emirates that have tapped it to set up AI infrastructure for them. That concentration is a concern, but the company also said it has inked a deal of more than $20 billion over several years with OpenAI, as well as an agreement in March to bring its chips to Amazon.com's cloud computing service. The company also seems primed to benefit from sky-high demand for memory that is constraining the growth of AI chips and the servers they go into. Cerebra's chips don't require the kind of high bandwidth memory that is lining the pockets of companies like Micron Technology or SK Hynix. It also doesn't need the most cutting-edge chip-making process offered by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, giving it another supply chain edge. True margins are expected to compress because the company is spending a lot of money on expansion and renting back some of its equipment from customers to meet demand. But in the long term, Cerebras has good chances for good growth. Asa Fitch. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the June 25th issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been P. Fitz. Thank you for listening.